Can I say, first of all, congratulations to those who are baptized and those who honor Christ honor you if you were baptized. We honor your faith, we honor your commitment, your courage, your public testimony of your personal faith. We honor you. Secondly, can I say regarding the Compassion in Action offering, you know, this last season of my life has reinforced something that's always true, but just harder to see. And that is that life is short and the opportunity to do good is limited. We don't feel that way mostly in life. We think, oh, there's time to do good, especially outside the circle of our immediate concern, you know, those that we have our eye on all the time. The opportunity to do good beyond that circle through something like what was talked about and done today is limited. So can I say I honor you, those of you who just said, I'm going to sow into this. I'm going to sow into something that's way bigger than me, way bigger than, you know, kind of my immediate concern. And I just bless that. I'm so proud of that. So I'll leave it there. I'm jumping into the Inside Out series. I was supposed to be here last weekend, and which would have been a better choice because if we've not met before, by the way, I'm really glad to have this chance to share some time. But I'm not known for being on time. So the fact that we've had a service loaded with other things and that clock already says to me that I'm like out of time, then things aren't going to go that well necessarily, you know, and it's not anyone's fault but me. I was, you know, I had surgery and didn't kind of quite recover like I'd hoped to, and I'm just, again, so glad to be here, so glad to be jumping in to what you've been looking at together these last number of weeks. You know, our culture has this interesting fascination both with the success of people, kind of maybe the stunning, swift, large success of people in fame or wealth or influence or whatever it might be. We love to watch people ride the rocket, you know, kind of up in the stratosphere of human experience of these things. But we also like to watch them crash. That is a very heightened characteristic in our culture today, I think in part because of the mass availability of information, particularly through social media, that there's this awareness of, and there's some pleasure that's taken both in the ride up and in the crash down. The Bible tells the story of some people who rode the rocket up and crashed down. It doesn't, however, tell that story to feed some kind of curiosity or twisted pleasure in us that takes a vicarious or virtual delight in both the exaltation of someone and in their abasement. That we actually, in the Bible, encounter stories like that in the hope that we might learn from them, both on the way up and on the way down. I don't know about you in your life, how you have learned things. I think that the best way, of course, to learn things is through good models, good mentors, people who can kind of show us how it's done. When Nancy and I got married, 43 years ago, that we both came out of families and family systems where there hadn't been a great deal of marriage success. So that was certainly true on my side, but also for Nancy and her immediate family. And so we didn't have a whole lot of awareness about how do you do this thing called marriage in a healthy, loving, lasting way. And so we, got thrown together, and I think both of us probably tried to do a few things that we'd seen in our past, which weren't good models, weren't good, kind of good examples, and that didn't go well at all. And then we figured out at some point that, you can learn from bad examples, bad models, bad mentors. You just kind of have to learn what not to do. And so in our marriage, we started doing things like, well, that didn't work, what we saw, but maybe if we do the opposite, that'd at least be a starting point. You know, instead of, like my father did, rip the kitchen cabinet doors off of their frames, maybe if I shut them gently in an argument, let's see how that would work. You know, just how do you process? How do you pick up? How do you learn when the examples are bad? We've been looking together, starting last weekend with Jonathan, looking at Solomon's life. Solomon is maybe the preeminent example in the Bible of someone who rode the rocket up to unimaginable heights and then crashed and burned in the most tragic ways possible for himself, for his family, for his nation. Tragic. There's no entertainment delight in this kind of, exposure to that tragic arc. There's only the opportunity to maybe learn something, maybe take hold of something important, maybe take hold of it in an extreme way that Solomon's life is full of extremes, but in a way that would be applicable to our life and hopefully save us a lot of pain and probably a lot of sorrow. 1 Kings chapter 10. Chapter 10 and 11 is what we're really looking at. I'm going to read the first portion of chapter 10 and then the first portion of chapter 11, and we'll get a sense of this rocket ride and crash that is Solomon's life. First, the ascent. Chapter 11 is basically going to tell us an incident from Solomon's kingship that underlines the success that his wisdom brought. Remember, Solomon is the son of King David. He's inherited the throne. He was the favored son of the favored wife of the legendary King David, and not that he was a legend, but bigger than life. And here's Solomon, assuming the throne as a young man and making this, just fortuitous right decision when God appears to him and says, you can have anything that you want, and he asks for wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to take what you understand, to have a deep understanding of something. It's not about the accumulation just of knowledge. It's not having a list of truths. It's about having a deep understanding of something and applying that understanding to life in a way that both preserves life and multiplies it, gives life for yourself, for others. So Solomon is given and graced by God in this incredible way to have a deep understanding of people and life and apply that understanding in a way that brings life. Now, that wisdom, that kind of wisdom that brings life, not only brought Solomon enormous fame, as the background of the story we're about to read, but also great abundance, that it brought him great success in the management of life and his kingdom, and it brought him incredible prosperity. This is what 1 Kings 10 tells us. When the queen of Sheba is an area no one knows for sure, but most likely an area in present day Yemen, and so she's an Arabian queen who's traveled to the west to come to Israel to meet Solomon. The queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relation to the name of the Lord. She came to test him with hard questions. I like this woman. Like, she's got hard questions in her life. Do you have hard questions in your life? Like things you need to understand, you need to sort out, as a person or in a position of authority or influence or responsibility. She had hard questions in her life. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. He had deep understanding. When the Queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built and the food on his table and the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. Pause button. What Solomon was doing and had done had order and clarity and security around it. Now, this has to be understood against the background of the ancient world that had none of those things, that was chaotic, not orderly, that was very much everything at risk, not secure, and that everything seemed to be, there wasn't clarity or conviction or understanding about much. To understand the Old Testament in particular and the ancient world as it is, I've always said, and this is a bit simple, but it is true, that the highest goal of life for an ancient person was survival. That was the goal of life, to survive for you, your descendants, your name, whatever, to survive. In the modern postmodern world we occupy, we've taken several steps away from survival. You can still find the ancient mindset anywhere in the world where survival is always, every day, almost minute by minute, on the line. You can still find the mentality of survival being the highest goal and what you'll do to survive. But when you take a few steps away from just survival being on the line, now our highest goal in life is satisfaction. So sometimes, like a thing like Solomon will be read from a modern, postmodern kind of idea about life and think, wow, he had all these goods, he must have been so satisfied. Or that Queen of Sheba was so impressed with the luxurious lifestyle he created for himself that she kind of envied his satisfaction. That's nothing to do with it. It all has to do, her being overwhelmed has to do with the reality that the ancient world is a chaotic, risk-filled, dangerous place. And here is Solomon establishing a community, a culture, a people, a nation that has these seemingly orderly, clear, and secure characteristics about it. Following me? Okay. That's not preaching, that's just explaining. Okay. So she said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your men must be, how happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were there so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. She gave him gifts to honor him. 120 talents of gold, somewhere between 4 and 5 tons of gold, between maybe 9,000 pounds of gold, which was actually nothing, because later on the chapter will tell us that his yearly income, that was apart from all the wealth that came, because he'd created Israel as secure and wise in its positioning. Then he was able to control the trade routes from the east in Arabia into North Africa, into the southern part of the Mediterranean world, that all of that had its own financial benefit. But just the income that was derived through taxes, through the ways in which he was accumulating wealth, 1 Kings 10 tells us was 666 talents per year, 25 tons of gold per year. Gold was so common in Jerusalem that silver was thought to be nothing. We're talking about immense wealth. If you are intrigued by the number 666, you probably should be, because it's a representative number. It probably was not a literal number of the actual income. And the 666, as it does and appears in the book of Revelation, simply is emphasizing the humanity of this, that this isn't God, this is human beings. Sixth day of creation times 3, this fully human. Like this is the apex of kind of human capability or whatever. That Samson is just receiving enormous, unprecedented wealth. He also in chapter 10, a little kind of foreshadowing of what's to come, that in his palace, in which he has created a large hall called the Hall of the Forest of Lebanon. You know, Lebanon was famed for its cedar forests. And so this massively large hall that had cedar pillars in it, so many that it looked like a forest. And in that hall, he had commissioned shields, you know, kind of emulating the war shields of an army, but they were made out of solid gold. And there were, according to 1 Kings 10, 500 of them that were kind of wallpapered the hall of the Forest of Lebanon. Those were merely expressions. They were useless, right? They were not functional. They weren't equipping the army or something. They were just shouting to everyone that would be brought into that hall that Solomon was of enormous power and wealth. When I read stuff like that in the Bible, I ask myself, what do I have? No, seriously. Like, what shields have I created to display for people that just wants to tell them, like, I'm really something? Like, we do, this is us. This is humanity, you know, maybe at a level, Solomon, that's not our life, but, you know, what's on display to tell everybody that we're big time? Solomon did it to the nth degree. Chapter 11 begins to tell us how things fell apart. King Solomon, verse 1, however, loved many foreign wives besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Just think about that for a second. It's been a lifelong goal of mine to keep one woman happy, and I have not really succeeded at that. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's commands. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Solomon's enormous success and affluence and unlimited ability to pursue anything, in the end becomes something really wicked. And you probably won't know the names of these gods that are marched out in 1 Kings 11, but let me just give you a taste. The god Moloch, god of Sidonians, is worshipped through the sacrifice of your children in fire. You burn them to death to appease him. Ashtoreth, she's the consort of Baal, the Canaanite god. They're both fertility deities. Ashtoreth, Astarte, Ashtoreth. There's so many different names for all of them. But Ashtoreth is worshipped at high places in usually a place marked with a phallic symbol, a pillar. And she's offered food and incense and sometimes ritual prostitution, where you would take the most exploited people in the culture, the poor and the children, and you would lie with them on a high place in what I call monkey see, monkey do religion. You're saying to this horror of a goddess, Ashtoreth, like, see what I'm doing to this child or this slave? Do that to my crops and my herds and my household, multiply them, just make them fertile. These are the things that Solomon gave way in his heart to. And as a result, God turns against him. And what was a favored life now became an opposed life. In your notes, we're going to talk about the attitude that God highlights, your attitude. What was Solomon's attitude that led to such disaster, such ruin? King Solomon in the Bible is a notable example for both what it means to succeed at leading a wise life and what it looks like to fail at leading that wise life. As is true for many, Solomon's success was ultimately undone by his failure. The blessing and abundance that Solomon's God-given wisdom produced over time became unbridled excess for a way of life and leadership that ended God-opposed. Solomon's historic excess put to test the human inclination to believe if a little is good, a lot more is better. A lot more in Solomon's case did not result in greater righteousness and justice. That's what the Queen of Sheba had told Solomon. That was a widely believed thought in the ancient world. All kingdoms in the ancient world believed that the ruler ruled by divine right. They were chosen of God or somehow especially related to God. But also all the ancient kingdoms believed that divine right to rule that some had came with responsibility. They had power and affluence, and her phrasing of it is a very fine one, that the end goal was the perpetuation, the maintenance, the spread of righteousness and justice. That's not what happened in Solomon's case, nor did it result in unprecedented levels of personal satisfaction and joy. Read Ecclesiastes. Solomon was seduced by his success and corrupted by his excessive accumulation of wealth, wives, and power, becoming in the process a cautionary tale, warning us against living lives consumed, first of all, by appetite. By appetite. You and I have our appetites. We have our appetites for good things, or at least neutral things that are not inherently toxic or destructive or malevolent. And we may have our appetite for some of those things as well. Some of those things that have no innocence about them, that actually have a malevolent effect on us and on others. And the reality is that we are constrained in our appetites by two things. One is our circumstances. Let's just be honest. Most of us don't have the unlimited capacity that wealth like Solomon's, power like Solomon's would provide, right? Like, there's nothing he would be out of his reach just simply because of circumstances. You and I, we have barriers, we have hedges around our life, but we're meant to be constrained more than by circumstances. We're meant to be ultimately constrained by our free choice, by our ability to say yes, that even the healthy appetites, even the good appetites in my life need a certain governance, and certainly those things that are ultimately destructive to me, they become like what was for Solomon, forbidden. Forbidden. So there's some things, and unfortunately we get at those things, the true deadly nature of them, often by hitting the bottom of the barrel, that we actually kind of crash and burn and then now self-identify that those things for us should be forbidden. Like maybe somebody else could handle a little bit of that, but that's going to kill me. And so then again, it's not simply the threat of death that constrains us. It is this choice to constrain ourselves in these arenas. Now, when I growing up as a kid, I was the youngest of four by a lot of years. I was the baby accident of the family, and we didn't have a lot of resources, and meal times could be, like grab fests. And when you're the littlest and smallest and youngest, and like you came away with like a limited piece of the pie. This was particularly true about pie or anything else sweet, which was a highly prized thing. My mother sometimes occasionally would make chocolate chip cookies, and she'd have to count them out and divide them up into 4 sections, and she would wrap them in aluminum foil and give them to each of the 4, which we would promptly then hide ours and look for our siblings so we could eat theirs. Now, being the youngest again and not the brightest, guess who's always was found out? One day my mom, a very exceptional day, Saturday, she worked like a dog through the week. Saturday morning, she went out, had her hair done as normal, brought home a dozen glazed donuts. The siblings weren't there. I ate the dozen glazed donuts. 5 years old. Don't know where I put it, really. Do you know that made me sicker than a dog? Couldn't eat a glazed donut for decades after. We all understand that appetite has to be governed. It has to be restrained. There's both the issues of what's right and good and issues of what should be rejected, forbidden. Religion plays into this because, unfortunately, the history of religion also often wants to just make lots of things forbidden. And that's really not the biblical way. But there are some things forbidden, and sometimes those things are personal as well as universal. In other words, they're not just about everyone's forbidden them, they're especially for you, like in your own particular life and tendencies. And Solomon just simply rejected all of that. He rejected any constraint, he rejected any boundary, anything being forbidden, anything being governed. He rejected it all. That's an attitude you want to avoid. Secondly, Solomon was seduced by his success and corrupted by his excessive accumulation of wealth, wives, and power, becoming a cautionary tale, warning us against living lives consumed by arrogance. Consumed by arrogance. I don't know how it happens. I just know it happens over and over again. That we are blessed with something. We are given something, that it comes to us not because we carved it out of stone. It comes to us because we are the recipient of the gift. We're gifted by God or blessed or graced, and somehow the benefit or the blessing or the success that comes from that, we turn in on ourselves. We take the credit for. We become the source of those things, denying the truth of what's out there. Paul says in Romans, for instance, that, man, I know just how that feels. Whoever's, I've been there even recently. The truth of the thing is that it all starts going dark for us, Paul says in Romans, when we refuse to acknowledge God and give thanks. When we refuse to see ourselves as the recipient of blessing or goodness or gift or whatever. When we disconnect there, then the lights kind of go out here and here in our mind and heart. And it says our foolish hearts become darkened. And arrogance is the natural outcome of that. Solomon, chapter 10 will tell us, it will give us a little bit of detail. Solomon built a throne for himself that was 6 steps high. Like there were 6 steps up to the platform of his throne, and each step had lions, carved lions on the steps. So there's this dozen lions leading up to his throne, which is on a platform, and all of it is covered in gold. It says there's like no king had anything like it. It seems to be true. Like, Tutankhamun's tomb, when it was, unearthed and examined, if you've ever seen the throne of Tutankhamun, the Pharaoh of Egypt, it looks like a nice, like armed dinner chair, like that was his throne. Solomon created a throne where he was above people by 6 steps with all these lions facing outward. Can we say arrogance? Can we say like, wow, I'm superior. I'm above everyone. I'm better. And what did he have that he wasn't given? Did he carve the kingdom out of rock, or was he privileged to receive the kingdom as a gift? Did he have the wisdom he had because he was just smarter than everybody? Or did God gift him to have that wisdom? That's something disconnected. Nancy and I have this, we don't have the same taste in films necessarily. And so sometimes we have to kind of barter with one another. Like recently, we had to barter that I would watch a Hallmark Christmas movie, which doing so, we have to remove all the sharp objects in the house because I want to hurt myself, But I would watch a Hallmark Christmas movie and she would go with me to see Ford versus Ferrari, a car movie, right? And so that was a good bargain, happy on all sides. But in the movie, which is a somewhat factual tale of an episode that took place in the 60s, that the leader of Ford Motor Company was Henry Ford II, the son of the founder, Henry Ford. And both the way that he's portrayed in the film and the biography is written, this is someone who, he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. The arrogance, the smugness, the superiority. Like I wanted to reach through the screen and say, what do you have that you haven't been given? And how do you disconnect that from a stewardship or a trust or a purpose? Solomon sat on his gilded throne 6 steps above everyone. Thirdly, got to speed up. Solomon was seduced and corrupted and becomes a cautionary tale warning against living lives consumed by apathy. Wow, you would think that if you got everything you could want, like nothing was outside of your grasp and you could just grab it and consume it, and that's in fact what he does, that it was all like that, then wow, wouldn't you just live? Talk about, our goal is satisfaction. Wouldn't you just be so satisfied? You would be, not only were the wisest person in the world and maybe in history, but you are the most satisfied. It didn't go that way. Not at all. Like actually, consuming up to the nth degree all your appetites doesn't leave you satisfied at all. It actually leaves you apathetic. And so when you read Ecclesiastes, for instance, Ecclesiastes starts by saying, this written by a son of David, a king of Israel. So most people assume it's Solomon. Could have been someone else. Nevertheless, it's someone on the exact same track that Solomon was on. And in Ecclesiastes, they describe to the nth degree the way that they consume things. And it starts off this way. This is their the book starts off with the bottom line conclusion of that approach. And it says, meaningless, meaningless. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Wow. I love the fact that the little phrase compassion and action, connecting our feelings of empathy, our shared sense of suffering with someone's pain, that it connects that with, okay, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to take a step. I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to put into action, right? Compassion and action. I think with regard to a sense of blessing or abundance or success or favor or whatever else we can associate with what we've been given, that needs to be attached to blessing and conviction. Conviction. Somehow Solomon lost all conviction. It was all apathy. It's all meaningless. No, you know what's meant to happen from being given stewardship of things and opportunities and influences is that it ought to all become more meaningful. Meaningful. It's all meaningful. And what's not meaningful is to be disconnected from purpose. And so Solomon's ever-expanding wealth and affluence was meant to usher in unprecedented ways to expand righteousness and justice. That would have been a world changer at the time that Solomon had lived. If he had innovated with wisdom ways in which that people could be done right by and justice could come to those who so desperately need it, that would have been a game changer. We're not meant to live lives of apathy, but of conviction. We're meant to live lives of passion that has linked to purpose, not consumption, not just our own aggrandizement or last thing. Solomon, seduced and corrupted, warns us against living lives consumed by alienation. Alienation. Sitting on his throne 6 steps up, worshiping Moloch and Ashtoreth and Chemosh. He is alienated from God, who loved him, who chose him, who blessed him. Alienated from God and alienated from his own people. It doesn't become apparent until Solomon dies. In fact, God says to him when he tells him the consequence of his attitudes, that he will lose his kingdom, it will be divided up, and someone who serves him, that would be Jeroboam, would inherit the bigger portion. He says to him, this won't happen during your lifetime, not because I'm trying to spare you the grief, but I'm doing this for your father David. He says it's out of regard for David that I won't make you witness this yourself. So Solomon dies, and Solomon leaves the kingdom to his son. He leaves his kingdom to his son Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, of course, just like Solomon, is the favored one of a favored wife, and he's young, and he's done nothing to earn any of it, right? And what happens is that the people, the nation, the leaders, the elders of the tribes of Israel come to Rehoboam after Solomon's death, and he's about to assume the throne. And they say to him this, they say to him, your father was heavy-handed towards us. Apparently some of that 666 talents of gold was coming off the back of his people who were exploited and abused and used and maybe not really in righteousness and justice. But they come to Rehoboam and they say, your father was heavy-handed with us. If you'll lift your hand some, we will serve you. You'll be our king. Rehoboam takes their offer and asks some of his older advisors, and they say, this is the best deal you're ever going to get. Like, you're young, you have what reason do they have to be loyal to you? But if you treat them fairly, they will be loyal. You should do this. And Rehoboam asked some of his younger comrades, some of the guys he's been play fighting with in the palace garden, and they say, stomp them into submission. And so a meeting is set up, and the elders are there, and Rehoboam says to them, my father has been heavy-handed, and I'm paraphrasing, this is David's translation, now you're going to feel my boot. The elders of the people stand up, they go, who are you to us? We are done with you. You are not our king. And they walk out. And the kingdom is torn in part, 10 pieces in the north, given to Jeroboam, the official in Solomon's court, and one tribe, Judah, aligned with their king, Rehoboam, in Jerusalem in the south. You want to know what happens to all of those gold shields in the hall of the forest of Lebanon? As soon as the kingdom is divided and appears weak, all those enemies that had been kept at bay and subdued by the wealth and the large army and all that Solomon had, as soon as the kingdom is divided, Shishak from the Pharaoh of Egypt comes from the south, besieges Jerusalem, conquers it, and takes all the shields home with him. How is it that the blessing of God, the benefits of wisdom, the success of circumstance, that we turn that and alienate ourselves not only from God, but from people who need us? Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. I see so many people, we may not have the wealth of tons of gold being delivered to our door every year, but we build our own little thrones and we think ourselves superior and we disconnect, we are alienated from all these different groups that we think are somehow inferior or less than or whatever, and that's the end product of our blessing of God, His graciousness to our life, His mercy over us, His helping us grow past our failures and faults, our sin and our shame, helping us to actually, build something of meaning and consequence. Last thing, I promise I'm done. This is James' statement about wisdom from God. But wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, doesn't have a mixed motive about it. Then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, that means I don't have to be top dog, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere. You and I, in contrast to where Solomon ended, you and I are to be moving towards people that have self-regulated lives. We're not just depending on circumstances to keep us away from our toxic dangers and our overindulgence. We're actually meant to be more than animals, kind of hemmed in by the fences. We're meant to be children, sons, and daughters of God who make conscious decisions in faith and loyalty and trust to put our own hedges around our life, to live in the embrace of humility and gratitude, to kind of move out of apathy or away from apathy into conviction and purpose. And rather than end up alienated or estranged, we are endeared and intimate with our God as we love people as we love ourselves. Let's stand up together and pray. Tell the children's ministry that I'm sorry, you're sorry, we're all sorry. Here's how we'll pray. By the way, just so you can take note of it, you're going to be late again in service when I'm back the weekend before Christmas. So just so you can anticipate that, I'll be back. Put your hand up with me if you need some help to kind of avoid the crash. Maybe you're on the ascent in the rocket. Maybe, you're on the descent. It's never too late, doesn't matter. You can avoid the crash. Some changes have to be made. Changes that are about embracing humility, about embracing some right restraint in life. It's about, embracing conviction and purpose and the meaningfulness of your choices and your actions and your decisions about what you do with who you are and what you have. Father, we pray together in Jesus' name for the wisdom that comes from heaven, that's peace-loving and pure, that's sincere and considerate. God, we pray for that wisdom to be in our life that produces life, produces an abundance, produces something to share, something to employ for the benefit of others. God, come and help us today. Pour out your Spirit here. Shake off, Lord, the ways in which we got kind of settled and seduced. Lord, shake it off so that we might walk free and joyful. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Bless you guys.